I recently discovered that, very recently discovered that the current school of French psychosomaticists, led by Marty's disciples Claude Smadia and Marilia Eisenstein, have furthered his ideas and incorporated many of Andre Green's views into their core theoretical understanding, reflecting a drive perspective that brings attention to the discontinuities of mental functioning encompassing the non-neurotic structures. As Green said, the psychosomatic patient puts soma and external reality into communication while crushing everything that pertains to the mind. I'd like to elaborate on Andre Green's theories, which have been a major influence in my work. He asserts that in severely narcissistic patients, the linking power of language was undermined by the affect, which resisted being linked in the form of a representation. So, in other words, words don't work. In Green's work on the negative, he elaborates on Winnicott's seminal idea of the transitional object, which contributed to his description of objectalizing and de-objectalizing functions. The former relates to the ongoing potential capacity of the mind to create new objects. De-objectalizing is associated with the death instinct, and it reflects a decathexis of objects and an inclination toward nothingness. It is Green's depiction of the manifestation of the death drive as reflected in primary depression, which speaks to the deep, immovable nature of our most challenging cases. These elements set the stage for the emergence of pathological somatization, where the dilemma may be to go crazy or to die. Actually, I think this is a good time for me to take a drink. And maybe a breath. As my doctoral work continued, I was drawn to this question. How did the limitation of psychic space for reflection, fantasy, integration, awareness of feelings, etc., relate to the presence of somatic symptoms and inform how these symptoms are utilized? Several patients from my private practice came to mind. I considered those who exhibited extreme lack of movement, precarious, dangerous states, and those with whom I experienced danger, either due to a toxic presence or evoking actual physical reactions. The prospect of designing a psychoanalytic research project finding observable, tangible factors in an invisible, unconscious world was quite a challenge. I wanted to find a way to codify elements, hoping to enhance my understanding with more nuanced distinctions of the deepest aspects of these early psychic states, to create another sort of roadmap. I revisited Andre Green's The Fabric of Affect in the Psychoanalytic Discourse and noted the chapter Affect in Clinical Structures, where he delineated groupings of defense mechanisms in the neurotic, psychotic, and between neurotic and psychotic realms with his own twist, and from the perspective of the place of affect in these structures. Green's clinical constellations, or forms of organization, focus on the incomplete structures and places particular emphasis on the place of affect in the clinical picture. The category between neurotic and psychotic best reflects the psychic picture of these particular patients, with a focus on instinctual impulses and differences in their management. Throughout, Green noted that these narcissistic patients require extreme measures to ward off psychical experience in response to threats to their psychic integrity. Using Green's clinical structures as a point of departure, I integrated my own experience in developing a coding scheme of potentially observable and inferable elements from which to understand and describe pre-object narcissistic states and defenses, The primary aim was to facilitate understanding of the function of the somatic and other defense methods utilized to manage internal tension states and maintain psychic equilibrium. Using 4 main categories, affect, thought, psychotic, and somatic, I created a framework from which to access the underlying psychic states, breaking each down to reflect distinct variations in defensive measures that could be noted within the context of the session. The coding list that I developed does not target psychosomatic patients per se, but the extremely remote, rigid, and constricted patients who seem immovable and allow a very limited range of psychic experience in sessions. As I mentioned, I have a number of patients in my practice who fit this description and suffer with extreme physical issues. For my study, I compiled detailed session notes for the patients, spanning approximately 6 months, presenting a window into these patients who have been in treatment for varying lengths of time. I coded each case, which brought clarification to the ways in which these patients managed potentially overwhelming tension states. I also analyzed the sequence of reports and displays of somatic symptoms in the context of the patient's particular affective thinking states. Along with the coding list, I included in-depth analysis of dreams and my countertransference feelings, including sensations, visual images, physical reactions, key tools toward developing an understanding, a deeper understanding of their unconscious functioning. While I developed deep insights into these cases over many years, applying the coding scheme actually threw further light and brought sharper focus to the ways in which they manage potentially overwhelming states. It also clarified how each patient uses distinct patterns of discharge in their struggles with underlying primitive anxieties that constantly fuel pervasive feelings of discomfort, various types of pain, and disequilibrium. To various degrees, this is expressed through somatic roots, bypassing affective and mentalized realms. Next, I'm going to present an abbreviated version of the coding scheme. So keep in mind it's abbreviated. The full version is available upon request. Pathologies of affect. The first is self-loss anxiety, terror, which includes terror, fear of annihilation, fear of death, loss of object forever. And essentially, it's a chronic state of object jeopardy at a narcissistic level. Number 2 is tension state without feeling, merger, blurred boundaries, diffuse amorphous tension state. 3, depersonalization, shrinking in space, fugue state, disappearing. Essentially, that's a temporary loss of object relatedness. Next, limited ability to regress in the session with a rigid hold on thinking and affective states. Affective anesthesia, apathy, blank emotional state. Next is oral fixation, an impulse toward incorporation, implosion. For example, binge eating, binge drinking, and a preoccupation with vomiting. So it's things oral. Destructive urges, projection, ejection, invasion, splitting, attacks on linking, on the ability for the mind to function, attack on the self, but not at a psychotic level. Now the next category, pathologies of thought. Limited capacity for fantasy, limitation of thinking freely, concrete, obsessive thinking. Next, lack of awareness of nuanced of nuance, impaired judgment, lack of self-protective mechanism. This would be implying disconnection with the outside world and a domination of destructive forces. Confused, empty head, no thoughts, projects experience into the analyst, but not a permanent rupture as in psychosis. Next is psychosis, psychotic. Blank state, affective foreclosure, no sign of tension, blank psychosis, as Green would say. Fragmentation of thought, no hold on reality, lack of meaning and connection, may exhibit manifest delusions or hallucinations. The next is the psychosomatic realm, when one group is the ones where the symptom manifests as an evacuation more than as an expression of a symbolic message. So they, and then I distinguish that between reports of somatic symptoms in the session or reports having occurred outside of the session. And then another category is somatic complaint that conveys a symbolic message. So with these categories in mind, let's move on to the cases.